If you've seen the news, then yes, Dawn of War 4 is real. Not only that, I've played it, and it's coming out next year. It honestly seemed like something that would never happen. We've all joked about it since, what, as old as this computer? Maybe not quite that old, but at least since like whatever happened with Dawn of War 3. And frankly, I didn't think this day would ever come. But alas, Dawn of War 4 is not far off the horizon, and I'm going to tell you all about it. So if you're just after the key points, then I'm going to run through those first, and then we'll dive into it and get a bit deeper. As mentioned, it's coming out next year. There are 4 factions: the Blood Raven Space Marines, naturally, the Orcs, the Necrons, and the Adeptus Mechanicus. Shout out to Bro from my Dawn of War Definitive Edition review, who will be getting exactly what they wanted. Each faction gets their own full campaign that makes up one overarching story. It's set 200 years or so after Dark Crusade, and is meant as a successor to Dawn of War 1. It features full-on base building, on-field unit upgrades, and somewhat asymmetrical factions, to a degree that I'm not exactly sure yet. It's being developed by King Art Games, who, if you don't remember, they developed Iron Harvest about 5 years ago. And it sounds like they've taken my feedback to heart from that game about how the mechs didn't fight each other, because not only are sync kills returning for Dawn of War 4, they've implemented and created this insane system where every single unit will fight one another with unique animations, and they've told me that that's over 10,000 permutations. Absolutely insane actual black magic technology going on here. Alright, now we can dive into things a little bit more. But before we do, I want to disclose that this video is sponsored by Deep Silver, so they're the publisher of Dawn of War 4, and I was provided early access to a pre-alpha build, as well as an early presentation by the developers on the game, you know, telling us what it's about and stuff like that. I was also given the opportunity to interview the developers, whose answers to some of my questions were very interesting, and you will want to stick around as you hear from them throughout this video. And now, while I was able to play the demo, Deep Silver have asked for me not to share any gameplay, as it was pretty pre-alpha, like, you know, basically all the Space Marine buildings didn't have textures, for example. But thankfully they have provided a bunch of B-roll for me to use throughout this video to give you an idea of what's going on, and I'm sure we won't have to wait too long to get access to a build of the game that is more polished, sometime hopefully not too far away. As Dawn of War 4 is being developed by King Art Games, this will be the first in the series to not be created by Relic. King Art Games are the company behind Iron Harvest, as I said, which took some heavy inspiration from Company of Heroes, which is coincidentally another Relic RTS. And it was pretty well received. Did have some issues, but overall a solid RTS with a pretty big devotion to the single player campaign, which was awesome to see. And obviously it had some incredible presentation, and that was probably my favourite part about the whole game. Like, if you remember, some of these mechs were absolutely insane. Probably my favourite looking mechs, or maybe units in general, from any RTS game ever. And I gotta say, I don't think Dawn of War 4 could be in better hands than with King Art Games. You might remember about 3 years ago when I made my Dawn of War 3 retrospective. Near the end, I theory crafted on what a potential Dawn of War 4 might look like. And in that video, I said that if it were to ever happen, the project should go to, guess who? King Art Games. So when their logo popped up, and I was vindicated, it felt pretty great, and it's awesome to see that become a reality. Here's what Jan, the founder of King Art, and Elliot, senior designer, had to say about why they think they're the right team to make a game like this with so much pressure riding on it, and what specifically that they bring to the table to deliver on what players will be asking for.
I think one of the big things is that we have like a narrative background, and we always felt, you know, story is very important, characters are very important. And also for Iron Harvest, you know, the campaign was probably the part of the game that people like most, right? We did the survey, you know, among RTS players when we did Iron Harvest. And a lot of them said, actually, the most important thing for me is the campaign, right? Not multiplayer, not competitive stuff. And so for us, it felt like, okay, we know that there's a lot of players who actually feel like campaign is the most memorable thing, or if they think about Dawn of War 1, you know, they probably think more about campaign than other things. And, you know, we are good at that, and we also like to do campaigns. And so let's go all out when it comes to the campaigns. And one of the first decisions we made was instead of just having a Space Marine campaign, or maybe have one campaign where you play mostly Space Marines and then everybody else pops in every now and then. Let's actually have 4 big campaigns, one for each of the factions. As soon as we thought about that, then we said, okay, wouldn't it be cool if within the campaigns you can then actually have, interesting decisions, and you can actually pick different heroes, for example, you want to play, or you can make decisions that actually, pay off later. Now we basically have, 4 campaigns, and each of the campaign is a lot bigger than the campaign in Dawn of War 1. And that is, I think, this commitment to single player and to campaigns is maybe something that, King Art brings to the table, and I think also a lot of the fans will appreciate.
While we were working on Iron Harvest, one of the things that we really valued, because of course we were a Kickstarter project and we wanted to be transparent, so that often meant that as devs, we would occasionally also be in the community, interact with them, answer questions, so on and so forth. And one thing that for Iron Harvest at the time, when we first launched, essentially, one of the big points of feedback was unit responsiveness, if I recall correctly. And that was something that we really took to heart for this project too. I'm sure if you've played the demo, if you compared it to Iron Harvest now, it's a big jump in improvement. So there's a lot of those things, like that's a big one, but obviously there's, as Jan said, there's a ton of lessons that we learned from Iron Harvest that we were very keen to apply here to Dawn of War 4 to make it bigger and better than anything we had done before that. And that kind of level of interacting with the community and listening to them and getting their feedback in early on is something we want to take on board for Dawn of War 4 as well. I'm not sure if I think we're still weighing up whether we want to do a closed or a public beta somewhere in the future, but that's definitely something that we're considering, that we're thinking about getting feedback early on to see, like, hey, are we heading in the right direction? Which, so far as I can tell, that seems to be pretty promising so far. But yeah, we really want to try and get those thoughts and get that feedback in so that we can make sure that we make the best Dawn of War possible.
After we finished up the add-on for Iron Harvest and we were already working on Dawn of War, thinking about what do we want to do, we looked basically into everything in terms of technology, right? So basically what worked, what didn't work, what worked, but we see potential to make it even better. And then we redesigned a lot of the engine and made it more responsive, more performant, and added a lot of feature that we just couldn't do in time for Iron Harvest. And that is the technical side. And then on the gameplay side, I think the main point is that we already knew that RTS is hard, but we didn't know how hard RTS actually is. Faction design and unit design and all of that, we just knew, okay, we need a lot more people and we need more people with experience. And obviously now we had the experience from Iron Harvest. The level design department, the game design department, all these departments are, a lot bigger because now we knew, okay, this is a beast. And for Dawn of War, especially, it's extra hard because you have all these very distinct factions and very distinct units, and you somehow need to make sure that they actually work.
Dawn of War 4 takes place around 200 years after the Dark Crusade, and once again is set on the planet Cronus. Man, if I was like a civilian on that planet, I would be pissed. What is this, like 3 or 4 generations of just absolute carnage? It'll feature some familiar characters like Gorguts, the Orc Warlord from Winter Assault and Dawn of War 3, as well as Cyrus from Dawn of War 2, which is pretty sick, and I'm sure probably some other existing ones that we don't know about just yet. It's positioned as a proper successor to Dawn of War 1, and it will include a fully fledged campaign. Actually, as I mentioned before, it actually includes 4. There's 1 for each faction. The roster of Space Marines, Orcs, Necrons, and Adeptus Mechanicus is one that I'm really happy to see. I'm stoked that we're not getting the same Space Marine, Orc, Eldar roster that we've seen so many times now, and I'm hopeful that we'll get future expansions down the line that will add other new factions that'll be new to Dawn of War. I will say there is already a bunch of Imperial Guard assets in the demo, so I wouldn't be surprised if they were coming sometime down the line as well. Here's what the devs had to say about why they went with this particular faction roster.
For the 2 factions that we started out and introduced you guys to, the Space Marines and the Orcs, those are kind of a no-brainer. Like, if you're going to do Dawn of War, you have to like showcase the Blood Ravens, right? Orcs as well, like especially coming back to something where it's like we want to take our roots from Dawn of War 1. Having the orcs also felt like this is kind of an obligatory thing. We have to do this. Necrons is that's an interesting choice, essentially what we made there, mostly because they're kind of a prominent faction right now within Warhammer 40,000 at this moment, but also because they were teased towards the end of Dawn of War 3, but that was something that never really came to fruition. So this was kind of our way of saying like, hey, here's something that, you know, we're making good on this, essentially, that here's fully playable Necron faction, but they never really had a full playable campaign before, so this is our way of saying like, hey, we're bringing this back, and here's more on top of that. The Adeptus Mechanicus that's a faction essentially where we chose like, well, we wanted to take a faction that hadn't been featured in the series yet, but was a very prominent faction, and something that was recognizable and something that had a lot of appeal to players. And the Adeptus Mechanicus was one of the couple of factions that we saw, this is a great fit for that. Let's try out like what kind of mechanics would fit with that, how would that feel? And that's just worked out really, really well. So we're really excited to bring these guys to Dawn of War as a series.
You will be able to play the 4 campaigns in any order you like, but story-wise there will be a recommended chronology to kind of play the story from beginning to end. Kind of like in Warcraft 3, I guess, how that works. In Dawn of War 4's case, the order will be Orcs first, then Adeptus Mechanicus, then Necrons, and finally Space Marines. And for some reason, having the Space Marines at the end just feels cool. I like it. Each 12 mission campaign will have choices that affect the story, and overall it'll have like nearly an hour of animated cutscenes to convey the narrative. Something King Art Games are clearly very proud of. It is pretty obvious that they are big campaign nerds, as am I.
I know that for a lot of people that I talk to when I'm talking about real-time strategy games, campaigns, like we said before, is something that a lot of people resonate with, that a lot of people remember also from those games. Dawn of War, Warcraft 3, Command & Conquer, all those games that people really look back on fondly is because of the campaigns that they got. Even if they're not necessarily hardcore competitive real-time strategy players, that is the bit that they love, and that's what we're trying to appeal to, what we're trying to hook in on.
I'm excited about seeing the reaction to the campaigns and to the stuff that's going on there. I'm also super excited that we actually were able to bring back like fully animated cutscenes and CGIs, you know, so each of the factions has a big CGI intro, and then in the campaign we have fully animated cutscenes, which I feel is great because, you know, when I remember back, you know, to you know, the olden days when I played the RTS games, it was always super exciting to, oh, cool, new cutscene, right? And we just wanted to bring that back, and I'm pretty excited that worked out.
This is one of the smaller things that I had, since I have been working with the various voice actors that we have doing all the units and characters and stuff like that. And it's been really heartening to see how much the actors get so excited for it as well. A lot of them, like several of them, have also been Dawn of War fans, Warhammer fans. One in particular, I believe, one of the playable heroes already said he's, next to being a voice actor, he's also a Twitch streamer. And he said, okay, I have to play this game on stream. I have to go make some cosplay. I am going to order this model from Games Workshop right away, essentially, and I'm going to play this as my character in character. So personally, that's something I will definitely be looking out for.
It's really fun. I think actually each voice actor, or every voice actor in the UK, secretly has his own orc voice ready to go. Because you didn't have to explain anything, right? They are just, okay, orcs, finally, you know, and then half an hour later, they're standing there drenched in sweat and they're happy.
Yeah, it's one of the most demanding performances, but yeah, it's a demanding performance, but it's definitely the ones that we have the most fun with.
The presentation is looking fantastic, and it's much more in line with what you'd expect from Dawn of War than perhaps Dawn of War 3 was. I'm loving the look of the units and art style where it is right now, especially when there's anything mechanical involved. As you could guess, with their pedigree in Iron Harvest making some of the coolest looking mechs maybe ever. Definitely in RTS games. Seeing things like Space Marine Dreadnoughts, these huge knights, anything from the Necrons I guess, just looks so cool. And perhaps the coolest looking part of Dawn of War 4 is what they've done with the sync kills, as I mentioned earlier. Because yeah, they're back, but they're more like sync battles now, because every unit will have a somewhat unique animation that they use when fighting any other unit in the game, which is over 10,000 permutations, like I said. Tell you what, I think the devs can probably explain it better than me.
Having played Iron Harvest, I think one of the other things next to the single player campaign stuff was also how the units looked and moved, right? Like all those mechs with like realistic looking animation, stuff like that. A lot of people came back to us with like, this by far looks incredible. And that's something we really wanted to double down with on Dawn of War 4 as well, by not just bringing back sync kills then, but also just sync melee as a thing. It was incredibly ambitious thing to try and do, and it's kind of a miracle that that we managed to pull it off in the way that it has so far. So that I would also say is something that is a bit of a hallmark of King Art's real-time strategies so far, at least, and I hope that we can continue with that further.
That's actually a funny story because Thomas, our head of animation, he's like one of the Dawn of War 1 mega fans in the company, because Dawn of War was really like his jam, right? He played it all the time during his teenage years, and when Dawn of War 4 came up, he basically said, okay, let's do this right. And he basically came up with this idea, okay, can we do like synchronized battles, right? And it sounded like completely insane because there are over 10,000 permutations of different units fighting each other, and we thought, okay, no, this is absolutely impossible. But he basically, him and a couple of tech artists and coders and so on, they basically went into their office, closed the door, and didn't came out for the next, I don't know, year or something like that. And then in the end, they basically said, okay, this is what we have, and it's this crazy system that basically dynamically builds combat animations based on like little snippets, and depending on what is going on, right? So the system, for example, says, okay, this is a small light unit fighting a bigger, heavier unit, and there is another unit left to it, and an explosion on the right. And this means that I can now play these animations, right? And I can use these parts to build an animation out of it. And it's insane. If you look like at the debug view, you see how the animations get put together by the system in real time, and it's wonderful because now you have stuff like, I always wondered how it looks like if a Redemptor Dreadnought fights a Tomb Spider, and now you can just spawn them and see, and it's there, it's cool.
So we're this far into the video and I'm yet to talk about gameplay, so I should probably do that. While I've only had access so far to the one mission where you play as the Space Marines, it does give a good indicator on the overall gameplay, especially on how the Space Marines are going to function once the game releases. Base building is in full swing here, and resourcing is handled similarly to other Dawn of War games, with control points, upgradable listening posts, and things like that. I just realised that I'm pretty sure this went to screensaver like 10 minutes ago, so I hope it looked cool. As for the Space Marines themselves, their numbers are a lot more limited than other factions like the Orcs, but they're very powerful and resourceful. Units have a bunch of upgrades available. Drop pods with Space Marine teams can be deployed anywhere on the map instantly once you've got the research, and you can even swap between weapons on the fly with certain units. You could have a couple of dreadnoughts, you could swap the weapons around to be like plasma guns or flamers, rocket launchers, machine guns, stuff like that, or you can change out the bolters on a Space Marine team. It's really cool, and I think a logical upgrade on what was available in Dawn of War 1. It looks like the beginnings of a great combat system, and personally I can't wait to see what the other factions play like once we get access to those down the line. As for the game modes that Dawn of War 4 will ship with, I'm very happy to say that The Last Stand will be available on launch, and I'm pretty excited to see what they do with it, considering Dawn of War 4 is more of a classic RTS than Dawn of War 2 Retribution was, which is where The Last Stand was of course introduced. Then there's obviously the campaign, and of course multiplayer with real players or AI, with a bunch of different modes and options you can turn on or off. Skirmishing in Dawn of War 1 was obviously a massive part of the game, and alongside mods, I think it's what contributed to that game's massive lifespan, huge fan base, and probably expansions that it received as well. And obviously it's still relevant today, with the remaster just releasing like last week. Now speaking of mods, I haven't heard anything on that front just yet, but I am hopeful that the game will support them to some extent. Obviously, like I said, Dawn of War 1, huge for mods, so I think it would be a missed opportunity to not try and get something going here for Dawn of War 4. But yeah, if it's something you want in the game, then I'm sure King Art are listening to the comments in this video, their social channels, everything, so if you want it, let them know. I'm sure if they hear enough of you asking for it, they will see what they can do. Who knows, maybe they're implementing it already and we just don't know. Now obviously creating any kind of game is hard, but making a sequel in a legacy series that's been established forever like Dawn of War and hasn't had an entry in so long is obviously a hell of a lot of pressure. It's probably one of the hardest things a developer could do, to be honest. So I straight up asked King Art Games how they plan to create a game that pleases long-time veterans, that can be easy enough to get into for Warhammer fans who haven't played an RTS before, and coax back casual players who maybe haven't played a strategy game in quite a while, but played the original 20 years ago and would be keen to come back.
I mean, what we basically did is we looked back at all the previous Dawn of Wars, of course, and we thought a lot about how did Dawn of War 1 made us feel back in the day, right? Because what you want to copy is not, a feature or something that, Dawn of War did 20 years ago, because it wouldn't lead to the same result today, right? Because people are just have more experiences and it's 20 years later and games did other things in between. So for us it's more about copying the experience, right? So we basically thought about, okay, what made Dawn of War 1 cool and why did you keep playing and what was awesome about it and so on, right? And then people say stuff like, yeah, well, the sync kills, that was awesome and we need something like that. But just having sync kills maybe isn't great enough anymore, right? But now having a combat director, okay, that's cool and that's awesome, and hopefully people will be as awestruck by that than they were by the sync kills 20 years ago, right? And we did the same thing for gameplay features, So for example, if you look at battles in the first Dawn of War, the battles could be relatively long, right? There could be a lot of units involved, but it also they shifted over time because new units come into the battle and so on. And one of the reasons was that you could decide to basically put resources into the battle to make sure that your units don't die or don't die as easily and get repaired, and you could basically say, no, this is my point and I don't want you to have the point, and I put the resources in there, and I put so many resources in there so that my reinforcements actually can join the fight, and then ultimately I will win. And that is something that is interesting because you might then win the battle but lose the war, right? Because you invested so many resources in this one battle. And that is like a great tactical or almost strategical decision, right? Basically, where do I put my resources? And that is something that we liked about the first Dawn of War, and so we thought about, okay, how can we actually implement this in Dawn of War 4? Right, and so we have actually this, a little bit weird to be honest, but we have this system still that you can reinforce units on the battlefield on the fly, so to speak, but it's a drain on your economy, right? And so this is like an interesting element for us.
Yeah, essentially what it comes down to is we want to take all the elements, the best elements from the Dawn of War series, all the things that we loved and that fans loved, and doubling down on that.
We feel that many people got into Warhammer because of Dawn of War, or maybe Space Marine, right? But because of the video games. And so we feel like there's obligation basically to make sure that Dawn of War 4 can be an entry point for people who are not really into Warhammer or don't know a lot about the universe. And so we made sure that basically you can play the game without any prior knowledge, and it's fun, and you don't need to know how the factions work, right? We tell you, and it's all good. And so this is basically what we try to do. Another big thing, what we try to do is basically we try to make sure that the factions are very distinct, but if you play them, you almost automatically play them correctly, right? So basically the idea is, when you play orcs, it just feels natural to, expand a lot, have a lot of buildings, have a lot of units, don't really care that much about your units because it's cheap, right? And you're basically very aggressive and you're all over the map very quickly, right? This is just how it feels right to play this faction. And if you then play, for example, Space Marines, it's very different, right? Because they are very elite, they're expensive, you can upgrade them a lot, and you don't want your super specialized and super upgraded units, so you care about them more. And, without telling you how orcs are supposed to be played or Space Marines are supposed to be played, it's very likely that you just automatically or intuitively play them the correct way, basically. And I think that is what we try to do with a lot of things. That, sure, if you're a Warhammer player, you already know what Necrons are about or what orcs are about. But if you're new to the genre, it's just this is a faction. Okay, it seems to be a good strategy here to just have a ton of units and throw them at the enemy, and that's also okay. I mean, the real answer is not that hard, because nobody is expecting us to actually working on Dawn of War 4, right? It's just many people didn't know that Dawn of War 4 is a thing at all, right? And if they expected it to be a thing, they didn't have us on our list. And so, it wasn't hard on that level. But on the other hand, of course, we're super happy that after 4 years we can finally talk about and show what we have and bring the fans in. For example, there's Warhammer shop in Bremen where we are, and everybody in the company buys their stuff there, and they know that we are a game developer, but they have no idea what we're working on. And so it's going to be a great day to finally go there and ask them, hey, you want to play Dawn of War 4? We can make it better, and that would.
Sure. Yeah, we've been sitting on this for a long time, so we're really, really excited and happy to be talking about it.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is everything that you need to know about Dawn of War 4. I hope you're excited about the potential for this thing as I am. To be honest, I'm pretty optimistic. I don't want to get my hopes up too far because, we've been burned before. But things are looking good. I like King Art Games. I really enjoyed a lot of Iron Harvest. And from what I've heard from the developers, they are super passionate. They are really keen to make something good here. So I'm very hopeful that this turns out to be a proper banger. During the time I spent listening to the developers talk about the game, and obviously playing it myself, I will say that I am quite hopeful that we might just be getting the sequel that we have all been hoping for. But, of course, we will have to wait and see, and find out when we learn more about the game, and hopefully play it all for ourselves when it releases in 2026. I will of course be reviewing it the day it comes out, so subscribe if you want to see that, and hit the bell to be notified as soon as it goes live. And hey, if you like what I do here, then you can support me on Patreon or YouTube memberships for as little as $1 a month. I hugely appreciate it, and it goes a long way, so thank you. And thank you to everyone who supports me already. And lastly, a big shout out to Deep Silver for giving me early access to all the stuff about Dawn of War. It was very hard to keep a secret, but keep a secret I did, and for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching it. Have a lovely rest of your day. Let me know if you like these facecam videos. Maybe we'll do more of them. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye.